When Keanu Reeves pulled over for a quick break, he never expected to find a starving dog collapsed behind a rusted fence. What started as a routine ride would soon turn into a life-or-death rescue mission, proving once again that Keanu isn't just an action hero on screen. He's one in real life too. The midday sun hung mercilessly in the sky, baking the ground below. Heat waves shimmered off the cracked pavement, distorting the outline of an abandoned house, its peeling paint and shattered windows standing as the only remnants of a life once lived there. But it wasn't the eerie silence or the forgotten structure that made Keanu Reeves tighten his grip on the handlebars of his motorcycle. It was something far worse. Behind a rusted chain-link fence, half hidden in the overgrown weeds, lay a dog. Its thick fur, once regal and strong, was now matted and filthy, clinging to a skeletal frame. Its ribs pressed harshly against its skin, each shallow breath a battle. The creature didn't move, didn't react to the sound of approaching footsteps. If not for the faint rise and fall of its chest, Keanu would have thought it was already gone. But then, just barely, it opened its eyes. Pale blue, like a frozen lake in the dead of winter. But there was no fire, no fight left in them. Only exhaustion, only pain. Something twisted in Keanu's gut. He'd seen suffering before, both on screen and in real life. But this was different. This was abandonment in its cruelest form. With a sharp pull of the brakes, the motorcycle skidded to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust. Keanu swung off the bike, his boots crunching against the dry earth as he strode toward the fence. The dog, if it could still be called that, didn't flinch. No growl, no whimper. It had long since learned that making noise wouldn't bring help. Keanu exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Who had done this? How long had it been left here? And more importantly, was it too late to save it? He reached into his bag, pulling out a half-full bottle of water. Twisting the cap off, he poured a small amount into his palm, lowering his hand carefully. The dog didn't move. Seconds passed. The wind stirred the brittle grass. Keanu held his breath. Then, barely more than a whisper of movement, a dry tongue flicked out. Just once. Just enough to taste the water. Keanu's grip tightened around the bottle. That was all he needed to know. This dog wasn't gone yet. And as long as it had even the smallest will to live, Keanu wasn't leaving without it. Ghost hadn't always been this way. There was a time when he was strong, proud, and full of life. A true embodiment of the husky spirit. He had once belonged to a family, running freely in their backyard, his thick fur gleaming under the sun, his paws pounding against soft grass as he played with the children. His world had been simple. Loyalty, warmth, and the quiet promise that he would always have a place to call home. But promises are easily broken. One day, the family packed their belongings into moving trucks. Ghost had watched from behind the fence, his tail wagging expectantly, waiting for them to return. He had no way of knowing that this time, they weren't coming back. They had driven away, leaving behind a house stripped of life, and a dog who didn't understand why. First, he waited. He circled the yard, sniffing the air for their familiar scent. He paced by the front gate, ears perking at the sound of every passing car. The first day turned into the second, then the third. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. His water bowl had long since dried up, the once cool liquid now just a memory. Ghost barked, at first in confusion, then in desperation, but no one came. People passed by. Neighbors who had once given him affectionate pats now averted their eyes. Some murmured to each other, shaking their heads. Poor thing, they would say. But none of them stopped. None of them opened the gate. Each one assumed someone else would take care of him, that surely this wasn't their problem. Days turned into weeks. Ghost grew weaker. His body, once built for endurance, began to wither. His once lush coat became tangled and dull. The hunger became an ache so constant that it blurred into the background of his existence. The only thing sharper than the pain was the realization that no one was coming back for him. So he stopped waiting. He stopped barking. He stopped believing in people. And that was the dog Keanu Reeves saw lying in the dirt that day. Before I share what happens next, I want to connect with you, my incredible viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt that deep, unspoken connection with an animal, the kind that goes beyond words, hit that like button. Because this story might just make you believe in miracles. Keanu had always had a soft spot for dogs. He understood them, their loyalty, their silent devotion, the way they loved without condition. He had once lost a dog himself, a loss that had cut deeper than he liked to admit. That was why, when he saw Ghost, something inside him twisted. It wasn't just pity, it was recognition. But recognition alone wouldn't save this dog. Keanu could see it in Ghost's weary, hollow gaze. This wasn't an animal that would leap into his arms, tail wagging in gratitude. Ghost had been failed too many times. He didn't trust humans anymore. Keanu knelt beside the broken husky, placing the water bottle gently on the ground, just within reach. He knew better than to force it. Trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned, one careful moment at a time. Keanu remained still, his breath steady, waiting. Ghost barely moved, but his nose twitched, picking up the scent of the water. He hesitated. The space between them was filled with something fragile, something that could shatter at the slightest wrong move. For now, Keanu didn't try to close the distance. He just sat there, patient, unmoving, showing Ghost the one thing no one else had ever given him: time. Keanu remained still, his eyes locked on the frail husky in front of him. Ghost's body barely moved, his shallow breaths the only sign that life hadn't completely slipped away. The water sat untouched, glistening under the harsh sunlight, just inches from his nose. But he didn't drink. He only stared at the bottle, at Keanu, at the open gate behind them. The hesitation wasn't just physical. It was something deeper. Ghost had learned the hard way that not every outstretched hand meant kindness. Keanu didn't push. He knew better. Instead, he twisted the cap off again, this time letting a slow trickle of water spill into his cupped palm. He lowered it carefully, making sure his movements were deliberate and unthreatening. "Come on, buddy," he murmured, his voice steady but soft. "Just a little. You need this." Ghost's nose twitched. He sniffed the air, catching the scent of fresh water, but he didn't move right away. His body was exhausted, his mind torn between instinct and the unfamiliar presence in front of him. He had been ignored for so long. Why should today be any different? Keanu stayed patient. Seconds passed, stretching into a minute. Then, finally, a flicker of movement. Ghost's head inched forward, ever so slightly, his dull eyes flickering with something fragile, something hesitant. His dry tongue darted out, swiping across Keanu's palm in a barely there motion. Then again, and again. Keanu let out a slow breath. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The dog was still alive. And more importantly, he still wanted to be. The relief was brief, overshadowed almost immediately by the next problem. Ghost was too weak to stand, let alone walk. Even if he wanted to leave this place, his body wouldn't let him. Keanu sat back on his heels, scanning the yard. There was nothing here, no leash, no blanket, not even a crate. He would have to carry him. But after everything this dog had been through, would he even allow it? Ghost's gaze followed Keanu's every movement, but there was no trust in those blue eyes yet. Just quiet observation, guarded and cautious. He had accepted the water, yes, but letting a human touch him? That was something else entirely. Keanu adjusted his position, lowering himself to the ground and leaning back against the fence. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He simply sat. Minutes passed. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed. Cars in the distance, the occasional bark of a dog from another street. But here, in this forgotten backyard, time stretched thin. Ghost didn't move at first. His muscles remained tense, his breathing uneven. But as the sun shifted in the sky, casting a longer shadow over them, something changed. His head drooped slightly. His body, stiff for so long, seemed to give in just a little to the weight of exhaustion. Then, almost imperceptibly, he inched forward. Keanu didn't react, didn't startle him with words or movement. He only watched as Ghost dragged himself closer, not by much, but enough. Enough that when he finally stopped, The tip of his muzzle rested just against the edge of Keanu's boot. A moment passed, then another, and then, in an act so subtle it could have been missed, Ghost let his head drop, resting it against Keanu's outstretched hand. A silent surrender. Keanu swallowed the lump in his throat, his fingers twitching slightly against the dog's dirty fur. He didn't pet him. Not yet. Instead, he let him be, let him take whatever comfort he could from the simple contact. When he was sure the moment wouldn't break, Keanu moved carefully, adjusting his position just enough to scoop his arms underneath Ghost's frail body. There was no resistance, no flinch of fear. The husky remained limp in his hold, his body barely registering the change. Keanu stood, holding Ghost against his chest, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. He was light, far too light for a dog his size. Without another second of hesitation, Keanu carried him out of that backyard, past the rusted gate, past the memories of abandonment that had haunted him for too long. He swung a leg over his motorcycle, adjusting Ghost carefully before revving the engine. The vibrations didn't seem to bother him. He was too tired to care, too drained to react. As Keanu pulled onto the road, speeding away from the house that had once been his prison, he didn't look back. Ghost didn't either. Keanu rode through the city streets, the wind rushing past him, but his mind stayed locked on the fragile creature pressed against his chest. Ghost didn't stir, his body limp with exhaustion, but his slow, steady breaths were a reminder that he was still holding on. As Keanu reached his home, a modest, quiet space tucked away from the noise of Los Angeles, he carefully lifted Ghost from the bike and carried him inside. The husky didn't resist as Keanu laid him down on a thick blanket in the corner of the living room. His body, once built for endurance and strength, barely had the energy to shift into a more comfortable position. Keanu knelt beside him, placing a bowl of fresh water within reach, followed by a small plate of shredded chicken. The smell should have triggered a reaction, but Ghost only turned his head slightly, his dull blue eyes watching, unreadable. He wasn't ready yet. Keanu didn't push. He sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, not forcing Ghost to acknowledge him, not demanding anything. He picked up a book from the coffee table, one he had read a dozen times before, and let his voice fill the quiet room. He read aloud, letting the steady rhythm of his words create a sense of calm. Every so often, he glanced toward Ghost, but the dog remained unmoving, watching him through half-lidded eyes. The first night passed in silence. The next morning, the food remained untouched. Keanu swapped it for something fresher, but again, Ghost ignored it. He barely lifted his head. His body curled into itself, conserving the little energy he had left. Keanu kept his patience. He spent the next few days establishing a routine, never making any sudden movements, never invading Ghost's space. He left food nearby, played soft music in the background, and continued reading out loud, hoping the steady hum of his voice would become familiar, even comforting. At night, he stretched out on the couch, close enough to watch over Ghost but far enough to give him space. It wasn't until the fourth day that something shifted. Keanu had just placed down another meal when he noticed Ghost's nose twitching. The husky lifted his head slightly, his gaze flickering toward the plate. For the first time since arriving, he moved cautiously, hesitantly, until his front paws stretched forward. His ribs still protruded, his legs weak, but he leaned down and took a single bite. Keanu didn't react, didn't speak. He simply watched as Ghost ate, slow and careful, as if expecting the food to be taken away. It wasn't much, but it was progress. That evening, as Keanu settled onto the couch, strumming soft chords on his guitar, he noticed something unexpected. Ghost, who had spent every night curled in the farthest corner of the room, had shifted. He was still cautious, still keeping his distance, but now he lay closer, just a foot away instead of across the room. Keanu didn't acknowledge it, didn't risk breaking whatever fragile trust was forming. But as he continued playing, his heart felt lighter. The husky was still afraid, still cautious. But for the first time, he wasn't hiding. And that, Keanu knew, meant everything. The morning air was crisp, the sun barely breaking through the scattered clouds as Keanu tightened the leash clip to Ghost's collar. The husky had made progress, slow, steady progress, but there was still one thing left to overcome. Trust wasn't just built inside the safety of four walls. Ghost needed to see that the world outside wasn't something to fear anymore. Keanu ran a hand over the dog's back, feeling the slight tremor beneath the thickening fur. Ghost had gained weight. His ribs weren't as sharp against his skin, and his eyes, once hollow and lifeless, now held something new, uncertainty, yes, but also curiosity. "It's time," Keanu murmured. Ghost followed him hesitantly through the door, stepping onto the pavement with measured caution. The world outside was a lot bigger than the quiet sanctuary of Keanu's home. Cars rumbled in the distance, a breeze rustled the leaves, and the faint laughter of children echoed from a nearby park. Ghost's ears flicked, his body stiff as he absorbed every unfamiliar sound. They walked in silence, Keanu keeping his pace slow, letting Ghost take in his surroundings without pressure. It wasn't until they reached the entrance to the park that the husky stopped completely, paws frozen on the sidewalk. Keanu felt the tension travel up the leash. Ghost's muscles coiled, his breathing quickened. There were too many people. Too many movements. Ghost's gaze darted toward a group of joggers passing by, then to a pair of children tossing a frisbee to their golden retriever. His ears flattened against his head, his tail tucked low. Keanu knelt beside him, his voice low and calm. "Not gonna let anything happen to you, buddy. You're safe." Ghost's breath hitched, his body still poised to retreat. But he didn't run. Not yet. Keanu stayed by his side, waiting, letting Ghost decide. The world moved around them, dogs barked, people laughed, but Ghost remained still, processing, unsure. Then, out of nowhere, a tiny bundle of fur bounded toward them. A fluffy golden retriever puppy, no more than a few months old, skidded to a stop right in front of Ghost. Its tail wagged furiously, tongue lolling in excitement. Ghost flinched, instinct kicking in. His legs stiffened, his breath shallow. Keanu held his ground, murmuring softly, "It's okay." The puppy yipped, bouncing on its paws before leaning forward and pressing its nose against Ghost's. Ghost went still. Seconds passed. Then, ever so slowly, his muscles loosened. He didn't run. He didn't snap. Instead, he let out a slow exhale and just barely tilted his head forward, pressing his nose back against the pups in a hesitant greeting. Keanu felt something deep in his chest shift. For the first time, Ghost wasn't just surviving. He was living again. The sun was warm, casting a golden glow over the outdoor adoption event. The park was filled with laughter, excited chatter, and the playful barking of dogs hoping for a second chance. Keanu stood near the edge of the crowd, his hand resting lightly on Ghost's back. The husky stood tall beside him, stronger now, healthier. The once starved, broken dog had transformed into something else entirely. He still carried his scars, both seen and unseen, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Ghost had healed. And now it was time for him to find a home of his own. Keanu had thought about keeping him. The bond they'd built was undeniable. But deep down he knew Ghost deserved more than a quiet life in the shadows of Hollywood. He deserved a family. A place where he'd never again feel the sting of abandonment. A tug at his heart didn't make the decision any easier. As people milled about families stopping to meet the rescue dogs, a small voice broke through the noise. "Can I pet him?" Keanu turned to see a little girl standing nearby, her eyes wide with wonder. She couldn't have been older than 8, her tiny hands clenched in front of her as if she were afraid to hope. Ghost looked at her, ears twitching. He didn't flinch. Didn't retreat. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand. For a moment, time stretched. Keanu held his breath. Then Ghost leaned forward, pressing his cold nose against her palm. The girl gasped softly before breaking into a radiant smile, her fingers threading gently through his fur. Keanu watched as something shifted in Ghost's expression, something softer, something settled. The girl's father stepped forward, speaking with the adoption coordinator. Papers were signed. Keanu heard words like perfect fit and forever home, but his attention stayed on Ghost. The husky turned to him, his piercing blue eyes searching Keanu's face, as if asking, "Are you sure?" Keanu knelt, running his fingers through the thick fur behind Ghost's ears. His voice was quiet, steady. "You're gonna be happy here, buddy." He swallowed, forcing a small smile. "You deserve this." Ghost blinked slowly, then, just once, leaned forward and licked Keanu's hand. A thank you, a goodbye. As the little girl led him away, Ghost followed without hesitation. But before he stepped into his new life, he turned back one last time. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Then, Ghost turned away, walking toward a future where loneliness would never find him again. The screen faded to black, and a single line appeared. One act of kindness can change a life forever. Ghost's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, resilience, and the power of kindness. From being left to die in an abandoned yard to finding a family that would love him forever. His story is proof that sometimes, all it takes is one person to stop and care. But now, I want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Did Ghost's transformation touch your heart? Let me know in the comments. Drop a 2 if you love this story and believe in second chances, or a 7 if you think it could have been better. And if you believe every abandoned animal deserves a home, don't let Ghost's story end here. Hit that share button and help spread this message far and wide. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds for more incredible stories that remind us of the good still left in this world. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time.